So we have officially hit the aftermath of the Carlos Correa saga that lasted 20 days, where we thought that Carlos Correa was going to be a Met for 12 years, $315 million. That ended up not happening as he went back to the Twins for 6 years, $200 million. So now that most of our recent content has really involved the possibility of Carlos Correa being here, it definitely flips the outgoing plans to a different possibility. And that enters Brett Baty, the number 2 overall prospect in the Mets system, who was slated to look to be the Mets' opening day third baseman next year. But with the Mets making no offensive upgrades yet, it's definitely come to the question of if the Mets can actually trust Beatty to be the everyday third baseman. So let's get into it. Can the Mets turn to Brett Baty in 2023? So as the big Beatty supporter that you are, Andrew, through the entire aftermath, how do you feel about this third base situation with Carlos Correa going elsewhere? And how do you feel about Brett Baty being slid into that role?
I was one of the Beatty supporters that was, hey, sign Correa, put Beatty in left. I'm not one of these idiots on the internet in this fan base that's like, oh, we don't need to sign him because we've had Eduardo Escobar. That was something. As of now, probably the second best prospect, third base prospect overall in baseball. Still a top 20 guy. The faith of Brett, do I trust him? Of course, because Brett Baty has had all the potential. I do think Brett, you can trust to be a solid MLB third base. Could have easily moved Brett into left field and potentially platoon with Mark Canha. There was a scenario in the world where that would have worked. Or hell, become the everyday leader because Mark, we don't know. Another 8-year older maybe regresses to a below average player. Brett could easily have taken over. Now, Eduardo Escobar and him are the third base. I still trust the kid. I'm not one of these guys who wanted him flipped. When we initially had Correa trading him for Jesus Luzardo, I still think he can be an above average of 125 WRC plus bat and hit 25 plus homers, hit 280 and be a very productive offensive third base. The defensive side, he could be an average defender, which he probably would have been more likely grade better in the outfield. But of course now he's going to be playing third base. But even the fact that we're still hearing as soon as the Correa news is done, oh, Manny Machado is the next bright young guy they want to sign. Meaning there's still a good chance that Brett is in the outfield. Maybe not this year. This year can be see how he plays a full year at third base. And then, hey, if we get lucky and Machado is a Met next year, we're back in the conversation of him being on the outfield, which I think he probably would fit better defensively in left field. And with Mark Canha especially no longer under contract, you could easily just slide him into left field, or maybe they make a trade for an outfielder or whatever. I think you can trust Brett Baty, the player. Yes, is he Carlos Correa? No. But also he could still be a very good productive MLB bat with higher upside of, hey, being a top 10 third baseman, potentially. Will he be, Matt Chapman and Nolan Arenado defensively? No. But can he be Evan Longoria, like I said in our top 10 prospects after the draft? I think Evan Longoria is still probably a very good comp, maybe not to the potential defensively as Longo, but I still think there's a possibility he can be a top 10 third baseman and be above average defender.
I think there's really some concern here, mainly because it looks like the Mets are looking to pivot to other bats that would obviously push some other prospects down the line. But it doesn't look like the Mets are going to be looking to upgrade that third base position. And I do have this whole concern of if Beatty is on the opening day roster, which brings up the possibility with Carlos Correa not signing here, I feel like he's just going to be the next guy being put behind Eduardo Escobar. We all know that with Carlos Correa being added to this roster, that is what made Eduardo Escobar expendable. Well, now that isn't an option. So I'm really starting to believe that Eduardo Escobar gets this starting job and Beatty gets this limited playing time. We all know that Eduardo Escobar should not be the guy blocking Brett Baty from being an everyday player. And I personally believe that out of all the third base possibilities that we have, of everyone that can move over to there on the roster, everybody we have in the minors, everybody that we have coming off this bench, Brett Baty, this is his job to lose. And I think that Brett Baty should be the opening day third baseman if they do not add anybody else to that third baseman possibility, which I doubt they will, because we're obviously seeing the reports about Manny Machado for next year. How they improve this lineup, because they haven't really made that many improvements, that is still to be seen. But I think that Brett Baty does slide into here fairly well, but I don't think that you can lean on him, and I don't think the Mets are going to lean on him the way that we expect them to, because I think they like Eduardo Escobar a lot more than him, which is kind of frustrating.
And yeah, that's going to be what every team does. They're going to trust. You're looking at the Dodgers again, for example. They were all offseason, we trust Gavin Lux to play shortstop. We trust Gavin Lux to play shortstop, and then they just go out and add a safety precaution with Miguel Rojas. Yes, do I agree with you? He should be the everyday third baseman. Yes. If he has the great spring, I think he wins the job straight out. But the fact that Escobar is here, and yes, they value the veteran presence, but if Escobar does what Eduardo Escobar did for 6 months, 6 out of the 7 months of the season, Brett Baty will be the starting third baseman within, in May. If Escobar does what he did last year, that was horrific for 3.5 months, and then has that really good month, and everyone thinks he's this great player all of a sudden. But Brett is going to have the ability, especially with Escobar, the whole infield, going out and playing in the WBC, including Eduardo Escobar playing for Team Venezuela. Brett's going to get in the everyday looks spring training at third base. And if he straight up impresses, and let's, not say God forbid, but let's say Escobar gets hurt in the WBC, and he has that great spring, then it almost is like it would be perfect in a scenario where, hey, it's Brett and then Guillorme is your backup third base. But you still have a backup serviceable, if necessary, third baseman on the roster. I still think they might explore options if they can get something in return for us. I know, yes, Correa not being here, but I still think that if talks were in vacation, and let's say we've seen the Machado room, what if they just say Brett's the third baseman? It's his year to sink or swim, and he gets the he gets the keys. And let's say they flip Escobar for, if they don't sign one of the guys that they've been linked to, flip him for the outfield, flip him for controllable, maybe a Steven Matz type deal. It just gives Brett the full on. He's the guy. Yes, is it great to have the insurance with Escobar? Yeah, and you're paying him. He's a free agent at the end of the season. You have control if he's here or not. So I still expect him to be on the roster. If he goes out and he wins Rookie of the Year, and you let him have from day one and battle for Rookie of the Year, I think this is going to be a very competitive race for him for the National League Rookie of the Year. But it's in that race and is one of the better rookies. I get it, yes, but Cohen, you don't want to hear it. But you need to have some of these guys making league men. Cohen isn't going to have a top 5 player and AAV at every position. That's not how good teams are built. The Dodgers with Will Smith, top 3 catcher, still making league men. You have this with Alvarez, and in Brett's case, if you just give them the keys and let them run with it, boom, you're not spending as much for third base, that you can use those assets to add another frontline rotation piece. Let's say, a certain, guy in LA next year. They don't need to sign Manny Machado. They go full on Shohei Ohtani. That's the stuff that you have to see. And especially, yes, this 2-year window, because I think it's bigger than, yes, there's a window now, but they still are showing that they want that window longer than 2 years. But hey, if Brett comes in and is the guy, you're making a league men for 6 years, or maybe you pull up Braves, give him 10 cents on the dollar. It's not going to happen. But maybe you give him the extension for 10 cents on the dollar, and you get a good buyout as arbitration.
I think it's definitely put more of a sour taste into a lot of Mets fans' mouths, obviously with Carlos Correa going to the Twins, that we have these third base options, and it doesn't really give much of an improvement to our lineup. I do believe that. I really do think that Carlos Correa was a big loss, and I would have taken the risk with the whole, whatever they didn't like in his physical for long term. It's nothing really against Brett Baty at this point. I think if they were to get Carlos Correa, that would have pushed it down the depth chart and kind of given the Mets a little bit more options to maybe move Escobar or maybe move Guillorme and address different parts of their roster. But right now, you're kind of just have this gap year where, yeah, of course, there is a third baseman in Manny Machado you could go after, but you have this 2-year time frame like we talked about, and there is a concern as to if the Mets should be trusting their prospects or they should bring in somebody that has actually proven to do it. Are there guys like Beatty and Alvarez and Vientos who could fill that void of power protection for Alonso? It's possible it could happen, but I think that the lack of guarantee is really starting to mount without Carlos Correa being here and without the possibilities of making this a deep roster and addressing different sides of it. As for Beatty, we know that he's a very advanced hitter for his age, and he really showed incredible strides last year in the minor leagues from double A and a little bit in triple A, barely even played in triple A, and then he was quickly called up. Is it possible that he starts in triple A because they like Eduardo Escobar for some reason and couldn't find a trade partner for him? That's also possible. If you do want to trust your kids, and if they're not going to spend money to full on improve this lineup, you're gonna have to use your prospects as your free agency acquisitions, which sucks. With the limited options out there right now, you're not going to get a game changer like Carlos Correa unless you make some kind of surprise trade out of nowhere. We know Beatty is going to get a lot of playing time in spring training, especially if they don't bring in other options that could play third base. I personally believe that he is more built like a left fielder, and I think that was kind of just more of that coming from the circumstance of them bringing Carlos Correa. But him at third base, I don't think the defense is amazing. I know you think his defense is going to be better, but I think the main question is, should the Mets be willing to trust Beatty to make this lineup better, even with the lack of his experience?
Well, again, we're just talking about the bat. Yeah, and especially, he isn't going to be the focal point of the offense. That's not why I made a comp to this with Alvarez to an extent, for Alvarez. But you can put the two together. Ahmed Rosario and Dom Smith were seen as franchise savers, as prospects. Obviously, didn't turn out that way. But when they got called up and when they were in the big leagues, they were supposed to be pillars for the offense right away. Alvarez and Beatty right now don't have to come in right away and be the pillar. You have your big boy, the Chungus, first base. You got your shortstop, 100 RBIs, 25 homers, Lindor. Your batting champion, Beatty and Alvarez, can be that second unit. They don't have to be right away. You're the focal point of the offense. They have to be, with Alvarez and Beatty's case, be replacements for Canna and Escobar. Levels of that. The second group, that second tier of the lineup, can they be productive? And I think, obviously, with Beatty's case, can be more productive than Eduardo Escobar. And it is an improvement, and if we're just talking strictly offensively, I'm not talking about defense. Throwing the defense out here, we've seen his approach, and we didn't like what we saw because we became a little bit too pull happy. Yes, it was 40 ABs or whatever with the big leagues. Didn't see that prime Beatty of him using left center field. If he gets back to being what he is, and that's using his power to the opposite field, obviously turning and burning and pulling down the short porch in right field, you can maybe add a couple homers now with right field fences coming in. But Brett can give you that 25 plus homers, 25 doubles, second half of the lineup, 6-hole hitter. In this lineup, he's going to be hitting, what, 7th or 8th? And in your 7-8 hole, that's a productive lineup. And who knows, again, what happens the rest of the offseason, the trade deadline, who knows?
Mets are really, really banking on these young guys breaking out instantly. And I understand that the Braves have had these types of situations where these guys come up and they're full on ready and they just work their voodoo magic and whatever. I will say that the lack of inexperience is something that they're really going to keep their eye on. And I don't know what direction the Mets want to go in. It looks like that they're looking to be more supporting cast offensive-wise. That's what they're going for, and they're going to let the prospects play. But the offseason is definitely not done yet, and we're going to see what the Mets try to do to make this lineup a lot better because they haven't really done much to it. We'll see how that plays into a lot of their prospects coming up, whether they start in AAA or they are on the Major League roster.